Next speaker is my friend and colleague, Heather Rice-Minus, who is the Vice President of Government Affairs at Prison Fellowship and leads our advocacy division. So, Heather.
Well, good afternoon. I'd like to just, first of all, thank Returning Home and all the sponsors here today and our speakers so far. Can we give them a hand? I've been blessed by the content here, and I've also really been blessed to see all of you sitting here today in the state of Arkansas who care about reentry and prison ministry and just reaching those who are incarcerated and coming home is a blessing to me as well. So as my colleague Jesse mentioned, I'm with Prison Fellowship. I work on government affairs, and so while most folks I think of Prison Fellowship for the work we do inside the walls in prison, and the programs that we bring there, we also have a small division that works on criminal justice reform at the state level and at the federal level. And in my role, I particularly focus at the federal level, working with the administration and Congress to try to promote restorative values in our justice system. So what we do, as Justin mentioned, is we equip volunteers to go into prisons and minister to people who are there, men and women who are incarcerated. We also minister to families of the incarcerated, particularly through our Angel Tree program. If any of you are familiar with that or already part of that, thank you for doing that. We provide Christmas gifts to children on behalf of their incarcerated mom or dad, and also have some programming that goes on year-round. We advocate for criminal justice reform, and then we also have a program that equips wardens on how to make our prisons more rehabilitative. We're celebrating 40 years of doing this work. Our founder is the late Chuck Colson, who some of you may know. He passed away in 2012, but his legacy lives on. He was incarcerated for a Watergate-related crime, and God gave him a vision through that experience that he needed to start Prison Fellowship, which is today the nation's largest Christian nonprofit serving prisoners in America. And then just a little bit about our impact. We have about 50,000 people who belong to our Justice Advocate online network. I talked to some people here today who get our emails and send letters to their legislators as a result of that, and would love to have you all sign up for that if you're not part of it. We have 376 small groups that started in the last couple of years who are using our outrageous justice curriculum, which I'm going to tell you about. And we had 18 jurisdictions declare April a Second Chance Month this last year, which we'll also address. And then that work inside of the walls, we reached about 24,000 men and women with programming every month at Prison Fellowship, but we do that, of course, through the 11,000 volunteers we have coming in from churches. So that's all made possible through people raising their hand and meeting the call to visit the prisoner and to speak into their lives and then learn from them as well. Okay, so I want to start with over-incarceration in America, the scope of the problem. And if some of you know that there is usually little debate about the fact that we have an over-incarceration problem in America. We have about 5% of the world's population in the United States compared to the rest of the countries in the world, but we have 25% of the world's prisoners, roughly. And so most people, would agree that we have an over-incarceration problem. We do have your U.S. Senator representing you from Arkansas believes we have an under-incarceration problem, but I have not heard that from anyone but him. So we'll keep going to talk about that. Some of these have already been addressed, but just a few stats. The human cost of prison growth, we've got 10.5 million arrests happening per year, the last data from 2016. We've got 2.2 million Americans are incarcerated, but there's also, as some of you working in community corrections know, we've got another 4.5 million people on probation or parole. And of course, as we were just noting with families, incarceration just doesn't affect that individual, right? It circles out to their family and their community, and we know that we have 1 in 28 children, so one child in every class roughly has a parent who's incarcerated, and that number gets down to 1 in 9 when we're looking at African American children. And then 70 million United States citizens have a criminal record. And this is roughly 1 in 3, that stat we showed you in the video. There's even more evidence to say that it's even greater than that. We have 1 in 3 Americans have a criminal record. So, if you're sitting at a table of 6, It's two of you, you know? And once I was in a congressional office, and I had a couple of staffers, and one of the staffers heard me say to the staff, they said, that can't be true. There's 4 of us right here. That would mean, at least one of us has a criminal record. And sure enough, one of the other Senate staffers said, I do. and so, I think the problem is far more prevalent than some of us realize. And then, of course, there's the fiscal costs. It's about, on average, $33,000 per year to incarcerate someone. And we spend collectively $80 billion on federal and state corrections combined. And we also have to think about the economic impact. We talked a lot today about employment and the barriers to employment because someone has a criminal record. Well, we've got about 1.9 million workers per year who are not gainfully employed as a result of their criminal record. And that's costing not just those individuals, but their families, their communities, and actually our economic impact as a whole. And just a little bit, we haven't talked much about the youth justice system. I think there's actually some really promising things happening in our juvenile justice system. But the juvenile arrest rate for all offenses reached its highest level in the last 2 decades, in 1996, and luckily it's then declined 70% by the time we reached 2016. But nevertheless, we've had caseloads. If you compare from 2016 to 1980, it's still 1.6 times what we were seeing in that span. So, and then we have a lot of folks coming in for juvenile court cases on the basis of status offenses. So that's things that we're charging youth with that would not otherwise be a crime if they were adults. So things like underage drinking, truancy, which is failure to attend school, and about 55% of those cases are for truancy. So you have a lot of young people touching the system because of things that we wouldn't otherwise consider criminal conduct if they were adults. A little spotlight on Arkansas here. We've got about roughly 60,000 people in your system if you think about parole, probation, and incarceration. And then your average cost is below the national average at $22,856.30 per year, which is, as Jerry indicated, probably paid for pretty good school in that amount of time, right? Keep going. And then here's some charts from a new report that was released that sort of show your parole, probation, and prison populations. And you can see that prison and parole populations are up and probation is down over the course of this time period from 2008 to 2016. I remember I was speaking at a conference once and just listed the number of people incarcerated in prison, and someone came up to me afterwards and said, but you didn't even talk about people on parole and probation, and that's much greater. And oftentimes, we may reform who's getting incarcerated, but we're just pushing it out to the community corrections population like a balloon, rather than actually diverting people from incarceration and lowering those recidivism rates. And so that's something we have to be mindful of as we move forward with reforms. And here's a chart of recidivism rates through 2013. So reaching levels, unfortunately, above 50%, which is not awful compared to some states, but certainly most people would not say a government program, if we thought of the correction system as a government program that's operating at an over 50% failure rate, is doing a good job, except if it's the correction system. It must be working just fine, is how a lot of people tend to think. So a few stories of impact. I've been grateful today to hear some of those stories, and I'm sure you've been blessed to hear them as well, of how the criminal justice system is touching people. But just curious, show of hands, I know a lot of you are working directly with people in the system or in the community who have returned and working on them as an individual and getting the services that they need. How many times has anyone here run into a situation where no matter what this person does, there's some systemic things happening that prevent you from helping that person move forward? Ever happened to anyone? Show of hands. Yeah. So sometimes it's not just about helping this person find the vision they need and helping them to move forward. That definitely has to happen. If that doesn't happen, they're not going to move. But sometimes there's these structural barriers preventing people or laws or policies that we also need to address. And for those of you here who are coming from a Christian perspective, those stats they mentioned in the first clip we watched, they talked about how Christians, we believe that visiting people in prison is so important. We believe in bringing hope to people inside the walls. But then when we run into these barriers and these structural injustices, we're kind of missing the mark sometimes about the passion we put forward on doing those things based on our values, or missing how our values apply to those things. So just a few pictures of people who have been touched by the system, and perhaps some things that do need to be changed with policies. This young man, Caleb, was diagnosed with autism. He's 11 years old, and the teacher called the kids to line up in class, and he didn't line up, so she called the school resource officer. He ended up grabbing Caleb, perhaps not informed by how to handle a child with autism. The child struggled, and in the end, he was charged with felony assault and battery on a law enforcement officer and landing himself in the juvenile justice system. And so some of this and some of the things that we need to think about are how are we handling people who maybe have a mental illness or other developmental delays. How do we handle people like that who maybe aren't following the rules but not intentionally or with criminal intent? Are there better ways to go about that? Another young woman, a young mother, Adriana's story, wanted to share. She was living in a shelter with her baby girl, and she asked a friend to watch her child while she went out to buy diapers that she'd run out of. The shelter staff saw her leaving without her child and ended up calling the police right away. And she was actually charged with endangering the welfare of her child. Her lawyer, because the shelter was so transient, couldn't hunt down this friend to confirm that she had not left her child unaccompanied. And so the issue I want to address here is pre-trial and bond. The prosecutor, for leaving her child there with a friend to buy diapers for her, wanted to hold her for a $5,000 bond. The judge set it at $1,500, which of course she could not afford. She's living in a shelter, right? And by the time all of this got worked out, her case got transferred to another judge who did eventually let her out. But by that time, she had lost her bed at the shelter, and her daughter was placed in foster care. And so this is just a picture of are we really hitting the mark in some of these areas where how our policies are set up, particularly with pretrial and bond setting. I think there's a lot of work to be done. This is Debbie Campbell. I've actually had the privilege of meeting Debbie before, and she's featured in our outrageous justice curriculum. But she was at a low point in her life. With her then husband, was involved in using drugs and then started selling meth. And she was charged with conspiracy because at first she was just selling to friends, but eventually she met someone in a different state who wanted to buy from her, and so she started doing that. And lo and behold, she's part of a circle. She doesn't even realize how extensive it is of people dealing, and they all get caught. And then she's charged with the total amount of drugs involved and the type of drugs. That's how we charge people at the federal level, type of drug, and the amount involved with this conspiracy, the total amount involved. Is going to be put forward. And so this was her first offense, and she was sentenced to 20-year sentence. And she said, I knew what I did was wrong. I knew I probably, need to go to prison, but I was shocked by the sentence of 20 years for a first-time offense, for a drug offense that involved no violence in terms of her role in the drug offense. And so her 4 daughters were forced to grow up in foster care. I think she was released at 16 years, if I'm remembering correctly. But she's now out. She advocates for justice reform. She's actually sitting next to my boss, Craig DeRoche, there in front of the Senate Judiciary Committee in Washington, D.C., testifying about the need to change our sentencing policies. And then, we talk about sentencing. We've heard a lot about what needs to change inside the walls and inside prison culture, as Jesse mentioned. But also post-release, there are things that need to change, right? We've got Robbie here, who after being released, he was lucky enough to get a job, and he was doing very well, but he wanted to volunteer for his son's school at party years and years after he was released, over a decade after he was released, and they found out he had a felony conviction saying he couldn't come. And so, the collateral consequences we place on people for a criminal record, it's not just employment, right? It goes much further than that. It goes towards stigma. that comes along with that criminal record that prevents people from doing things like attending their child's school party. I think he actually ended up talking to the principal, and they worked it out and said, no, this is long ago, this is not who I am anymore, and he was able to attend. But just another example of the things perhaps we don't think about that go along with having a criminal conviction when it comes to stigma or actual policies and barriers we put on people. So crime in America, is over-incarceration and over-criminalization the solution? Is that how we're going to get towards a safer environment? Is that how we're going to change people who do commit crimes? Let's talk about it. So this shows the decline in violent crime rates, and there's been an even greater decline in property crime from 1983 to 2013. But yet, the rate at which we incarcerate people has increased during that time frame by 165%, even though we've had this decline in crime. So those who believe we have an over-incarceration problem might say, well, yeah, we've solved the issue. If we keep incarcerating people more, the crime rate goes down. So that brings me to my next slide. You probably heard on the video, and I want to reiterate that researchers, looking at the causes of the crime rate decline, they say about 25% at most of the decline in crime is attributable to incarceration alone. But there's so many other factors. Things like an aging population, strategic policing that we've gotten better at, the community response to crime in terms of reporting, and other things have been found to be significant contributing factors. So those things in total are helping us with the decline in crime, and you can actually see diminishing returns when it comes to incarceration. In fact, there's something called the criminogenic effect, that sometimes when we put people in prison, as we've heard about earlier today and many times, people sometimes are coming out worse than when they came in, right? That would not be okay if you went to a hospital and you came out worse as a result of your services there, right? But somehow that's okay in our prison system. And so we actually see a diminishing return with incarceration. And so those who think we have an under-incarceration problem, I would argue, I think that there's a little more nuance that needs to happen to the analysis of what's going on with our crime rate. And I love this chart. This is actually from a paper Jesse worked on we tend to think that these perpetual punishments we place on people even after they've been released are to keep us safe, right? Why don't we let someone have that job? Because they're a risk. Well, the data, if we actually looked at the data, there's something called the convergence point, or some researchers actually call it the redemption point. And if you look at someone, depending on their age and the offense that they had, the rate or the probability of them committing a new crime is going to go down over time. This example is, I believe, a 16-year-old who committed robbery or burglary, and the brighter blue line is their probability of committing that crime. As you can see, as they're aging, that line is going down. Well, the dark blue line is representative of the average public, someone who's not ever committed a crime, did not commit burglary at 16. Well, we can see that the probability of someone who committed that crime but has refrained from doing that going forward over time, their probability of committing that crime actually drops down just a bit, below that of someone who's never done it. That's probably because they've experienced the consequence, right? And have decided, I'm not ever doing that again. But, when that person reaches 21 and wants to go get a job, and they are going to look back and let's say this did make it on that person's record, even as a youth, they're going to say, oh, I don't know about that, you're a risk. I think that person, that supervisor would probably be shocked for me to tell them, actually, they're less of a risk than the guy without the burglary, right? No one would think that. It's very counterintuitive, but that's what the data shows. And it's dependent, it changes, depending what age your crime and what crime it was. But the risk convergence point is something I really think is helpful for employers to be thinking more and more about. We have this paper available online. The title of it is Punishment Without End. So if you Google that, you can find it. So let's talk about some of the policy solutions and some of the things we're working at Prison Fellowship, the state and federal level, to try and change some of the injustices that we're seeing. And I want to first, though, talk about our approach to justice. For us, we're trying to seek a justice system that really recognizes and validates the dignity, human dignity of all parties involved. So we want to prioritize, victim participation in the process as we're looking at how someone should be held accountable. We want to cultivate community engagement. It's all of you here working in your various organizations and ministries and for the state that make it possible to see success. And so we want all the players and stakeholders to be involved, and we want to promote proportional punishment, transformation, and closure for those who are responsible for crime. So that's our basic approach at Prison Fellowship to how we look at what we want to see when we consider a policy to move forward. Pre-trial reform, I talked about Adriana, that mom who had her bail set at $1,500, right? She couldn't get out. There's a lot of states who are actually now moving towards using risk assessment in place of money bail. And so a risk assessment will look at, are you a threat to society? So that mother, Adriana, who left her child with another friend at the shelter, she's probably not going to score high risk on that risk assessment, right? And so someone who can't afford it is going to be able to benefit. We're seeing people who are living in poverty benefit from these using risk assessment at the pretrial level. We're also working to change sentencing guidelines for property crime. There are states that have the threshold at which we charge felony theft set at $200. So if you steal more than $200, you're going to have a felony on your record in some states. Other states have reformed this and gotten up to $1,000 or $50,000. Well, the reality is the states that set that $200 minimum, which is the lowest in the country, they originally set that as the threshold decades ago. And what's happened over that time? Inflation, right? So what you sold for $200 then is certainly, not the same value as it is today. And so even just adjusting for inflation would make a big difference. And this is a very common, one of the most common crimes, property crime, that's sucking people into the system and landing people with a felony is very serious to have on your record, right? We're also trying to reform sentencing guidelines, mandatory minimums that require a judge to at least charge someone with a certain number of years if they're convicted of the crimes. One way we're going about doing that, some states at the federal level, there's something called a safety valve. And there's objective criteria someone has to meet. They have to cooperate with the government. They can't have used a gun. For example, at the federal level, for the drug safety valve we have, if you committed a drug crime but you didn't use a gun, you cooperate with the government, you only have so many criminal history points, then the judge can choose, if you meet those criteria, to depart from the mandatory minimum so that they're not having to give you a very lengthy sentence, perhaps for someone like Debbie, who, although she was involved in organized drug crime, was not playing a significant role that might have benefited Debbie. The criteria helped a lot of people if they meet the safety valve to get out from under the mandatory minimum, but we're still trying to expand that safety valve so that more people can be considered. And a safety valve doesn't mean that person automatically gets it. The judge is going to look at it, the prosecutor is going to make a recommendation as to what that person should get, and they might not choose to go below the mandatory minimum. But it provides a little bit more flexibility. And that's something we're actually trying to work on at the federal level and have run into some actually very intense opposition from your Arkansas senator to doing that. And so that's something to be mindful of is, how can we create more judicial flexibility in a way that's smart and actually addresses the people who are playing lower level roles, particularly in drug crime. And in some states, they're eliminating mandatory minimums or at least lowering them. And then we're also looking at the sentence structure. Should some things that we now have as felonies, you heard in the video, prosecutors are charged with felony charges compared to misdemeanors much more now. So we're trying to reform what's charged as a felony versus misdemeanor. We're working on, providing more probation and parole opportunities out in the community rather than automatically using incarceration as our default response. Another thing not listed here, though, I think some of you are involved in, specialty courts, drug courts, mental health courts are another great way that we're diverting people and actually addressing some of the underlying issues rather than using incarceration as a default punishment. We can keep going. And then one last thing I want to talk about in terms of policy reform is we have a term we use at Prison Fellowship to describe those collateral consequences or barriers people face as the second prison. You get out of prison and you face the second prison of challenges, right? And so some of the things we're doing to address that is we're trying to remove barriers to licenses for professions and then also trying to open up more employment opportunities for people through policy and law change. And then we're also trying to, very mindful of restoring voting rights. A lot of people can't vote in certain states where they can still have policies. Florida's one of them that's working on this and is way behind. And so that's another thing that we're doing. And then let's keep going. Keep going. Okay, so I know we're getting a little bit on time, so I'm going to move to practical advocacy ideas. And there was a little bit more on youth justice policy solutions. If you're interested in that, feel free to come back to the slides that we'll post. But I want to reiterate something my good friend Jerry already said, which is to think about your language. Labels carry a lot of weight with them. And I know some people would say, oh, I don't know about this being politically correct. Well, if you're someone who comes from a faith-based background, or even if not, if you believe in human dignity and believe that people are first and foremost a child of God, why not attribute their identity in Christ first by calling them a person and not making their permanent label about their incarceration or their felony record? And so, Jerry gave some good examples in his presentation of other humanizing language that you can use. I would argue if you're part of the Christian community, we should be at the forefront of practicing this, not behind. And, using people in prison, or a mom and dad in prison, or my friend Carol who's incarcerated, or whatever it may be, and returning neighbors is another phrase, or returning citizens is another phrase that's become popular among those for post-release as well. I would encourage you all to get involved in the public square. If you're not already registered to vote, please vote in every election. Please stay informed of what's going on criminal justice issues. If you're someone who's involved, even if you're inside the walls ministering to people, one thing you can do is stay in touch with what's happening on criminal justice. You can follow her on Twitter. Our handle for Prison Fellowship that really highlights criminal justice reform is @JusticeReform on Twitter. It's a great place to go. You can also sign up for our grassroots network. That online advocacy community will send you emails and let you know something's happening in your state or at the federal level that we need you to weigh in on. And we have an online advocacy platform. You can literally send a letter to your senator that we've pre-written for you in a couple of clicks, and you can customize it however you see fit. But we try and make advocating as easy as possible. I think a lot of people feel like it's daunting and I don't know where to start. Please start with us. We'd love to help you and equip you on how to be an advocate for criminal justice reform. Social media is so important. Right now, our elected officials, like our president, never use social media. It's become quite the reverse, right? Especially under this administration. And so you can actually make quite a big impact by, even more so than sometimes writing a letter to your senator. What happens when your senator sees that you tweeted them? Everybody else in the whole Twitter sphere also sees that your message to them, right? When you tag them in. And so getting involved and getting more adept at social media is something we try and teach our justice advocates how to do. And you can retweet some of our stuff or tweet your own senator about your views, and that can make a really big impact because it actually holds them accountable for your request right there in public. We have available to us today, outside at our booth at Prison Fellowship, that my colleague Steve Gordon, who's here in the back, you can find him if you're interested. We have what we call the Justice Declaration. And it's a statement calling the church to both prison ministry and justice reform, and why we have a call to do that based on our biblical values. It's a short statement, one page, and we encourage you to sign up. We're trying to collect as many signatures as possible. We've had thousands of Christian signs, very prominent Christian leaders as well. So we'd love for you to take a look at that. And if you do sign, we also have copies of Outrageous Justice, which is our trade book written by my colleague Jesse and myself and our colleague Craig DeRoche, that really delve into the criminal justice system, the Christian perspective on it, quite a bit more detail. And there's also available to you you can go online on our website, prisonfellowship.org/outrageousjustice. You can find, we have a small group guide with accompanying videos, and you can use these with your church to create a conversation about criminal justice issues as well, and how we should respond as Christians. But if you sign the Justice Declaration, Steve would be happy to give you a free copy by supplies last of the Outrageous Justice Trade Book. I think we've got about 10 left, so please stop by the table before you leave. And then Second Chance Month. I mentioned this just briefly, the resolutions and proclamations that we had last year. We actually, this past April, had the President proclaim April as Second Chance Month. We had many states, including Arkansas, declare April as Second Chance Month, which we were very, very grateful for. What we're trying to do is raise awareness about the barriers people are facing in terms of their criminal records, and we're doing that through proclamations and resolutions, but also events. We have a virtual Second Chance 5K that anyone can sign up for anywhere and do anywhere. We'll send you your little bib and medal. But we also have some local ones that are happening in certain locations across the country, or we're partnered with other people to do them. You can start your own event for Second Chance Month during April. If you're part of an organization that's never heard of Second Chance Month, I would encourage you to come to Prison Fellowship / Second Chances, and you can actually sign your organization up as an official partner, get involved with the different things that are happening across the country during April. We've been doing Second Chance Month for the last couple of years, and that doesn't mean we're just focusing on reentry and second chances during April, but it is a great time to kind of come together and raise awareness, have a lot of social media and press attention on it that month as a result of the different proclamations and resolutions that are happening. So we'd love for you to join us this April in celebrating. And I also want to mention our Justice Ambassador program. We actually have Sheila Nelson here today, who's from Pine Bluff, Arkansas, who's one of our Justice Ambassadors. And our Justice Ambassador program are people from that 50,000 pool of advocates we have who raise their hand and say, I want to do even more than just email my legislator. Would you train me on how to develop a relationship with my legislators at the state level, at the federal level, and how to develop a relationship and then influence them and share with them my views. Or to host events like this one, where we're raising awareness about criminal justice reform. We also train our Justice Ambassadors how to write a letter to the editor of your local newspaper so that you can respond. So lots of different things. I had someone at lunch say, how do we change these laws? I don't even know where to get started. This is a great place. Please sign up for the Justice Advocacy Alerts. And if you really want to take it to the next level, I'd encourage you to apply. This is what Steve does. He has a caseload of folks, including those in Arkansas, who he trains. And so he'd love to talk to you if you're interested in the Justice Ambassador program. Thank you.